Okay, so we are recording again. Right, okay, so well done. You all got 3 simple value statements relating to your coaching from each other. What we're going to do before sending you back into those rooms is just demonstrate what we want you to do now. We want you to pick the first one of those if you manage to prioritize them, or one of those. And we want you to ask the person. So what's important? I'm going to demonstrate with Kevin what you're going to do next. So Kevin, what's important to you about coaching?
Helping other people.
Helping other people. So we're going to assume that that's the one he's selected for us to drill down on. So helping other people. Kevin, what's important to you about helping other people?
What's important to me about helping other people? Making a difference.
Okay, and so I'm going to take his response and I'm going to ask that same question back to him. And what's important to you about making a difference?
Making a contribution.
And I'm going to take that, making a contribution, and ask the question relating to that. So I'm drilling down 3 times. Kevin, what's important to you about making a contribution?
It's something about leaving a mark, leaving a trace.
Leaving a mark, leaving a trace. Okay, and that's it. But what I'm doing is noting down specifically what he said. So there's going to be a sentence response to each of those. And what we want you to do is note down verbatim what your coachee is sharing with you. Does that make sense? What's important is you've already got the number 1. Which value do you want to work on? Someone tells you it's this one. Okay, what's important to you about that? Answer this. What's important to you about that? Answer this. What's important to you about that? Answer this. Okay.
So you're taking that first value and then drilling down 3 times, yeah, with each of the answers.
Okay, I've opened the rooms. You will have another 7 minutes to do that, 3.5 minutes each way. I might give you 10. Welcome back, everyone. Was I a bit fairer on the time that time?
We raced through it and then had a chat.
I think Kevin did maybe pointed out that I was a little bit rash last time. Sorry. But anyway, you did it, which is marvelous. And the fact you could do that means that everything else is going to run very swiftly together. We've lost Kevin. I don't know where he's gone. I think he's gone searching.
No, I'm here. I was perusing my bookshelf just to see if I could find words that change minds. And just to show everybody that it's not just a backdrop, they are actually real books.
But I think mine might be in the bedroom, so I'll go in and look later. Right, okay. So welcome back. That was that exercise. We're not referring to that immediately, but it will be a resource for us as we move forward. But we're talking about filters here, and I'm sure we sort of drive this home quite strongly, that one of our key filters is values. So we also started the top of the exercise inviting you to think about your values again, because they are a huge filter that we've discussed on many occasions before. So just to remind you, in terms of filters and metaprograms, values are right up there at the top, but we will refer back to what you've done a bit later. And for now, we're going to move on with, I'm going to just share with you the fact that today we're going to be talking about 2 different sets. We're going to concentrate on motivational traits, and in the first ones we're looking at, and then we'll move on to working traits. So the motivational traits are the whys, and we know values are right at the top there, how people trigger and maintain their interest level, and conversely what will demotivate them. So the first chunk of metaprograms we're looking at fit into those motivational traits.
Okay, so we're going to spend a little bit of time looking at the first one of these, and this is one of those patterns that when I first heard this, it had quite a big impact on me. So we're going to share this particular pattern with the example of money, which is something that we can all relate to. Either personally or organizationally. And I'm going to demonstrate by this example the two ways this pattern operates. Now, we're going to start with person A, and person A is very clear on what they don't want in terms of a financial situation. So this might be about income, it might be about money in the bank, or whatever it might be. But person A is very clear on the kind of financial level that is not acceptable to them. It might be poverty, it might be going bankrupt, it might be not being able to spend as much, whatever that might be in terms of not satisfying their values. Now, what's interesting is,
and that's that red line, dotted line at the bottom, isn't it, Kevin, that you've put in there?
Yeah, absolutely. So if the person's level when we start this example is up here, you can see that they're a long way away from the line. So their motivation to do something about increasing their finances can be quite low, because they're nowhere near this level, so they can be a bit more relaxed in their mind about their financial situation. Now, what can happen is that if the motivation isn't there, that what can happen is their level of income or money in the bank or whatever can start to drop. Now, when they get to a certain point, their motivation will kick in and they will start to take some sort of massive action, going back to our ultimate success formula. And if their massive action is successful, then the level of finances will start to climb up. When it then gets to a point that's far enough away from this dotted line, and they know instinctively what that level is, again, their motivation can drop, and they can start to go towards the line again. Now you can see a pattern emerging here. It's like, oh crap, here we are heading towards this thing that I don't want. I now feel motivated. I'll do something about it, and then hopefully the action will be successful. So we start to see a pattern emerging, which is something like this. Now, money here is just an example, of course. For money, substitute anything. The idea here is that somebody gets an idea very clearly in their mind of what it is that they don't want, and their motivation kicks in when they feel as though they're ironically being pulled towards the thing that they don't want. Hopefully that's clear to everyone. We'll take questions on this in a moment. Now let's take, and this is what we call an away from pattern for obvious reasons. The motivation is coming from getting away from the thing that they don't want. Yeah. Now let's take person B. The difference here is that person B, or person T it says there, that's interesting. Oh yeah, I get it. Oh,
yeah, well done.
Awards it's away from. Yeah, okay. There you go. Breaking a pattern there. So person T is very clear on what they want. Now, what happens is, let's say the level of the thing that they want is higher, is here. Their motivation is therefore high because they're not at the level they want to be. So again, motivation's there, take massive action, let's say it's successful. They then get to the level of the thing that they wanted. Now, interestingly, what then often happens is the person will recalibrate and now set a higher level in this example, or say, okay, what do I want now? Now I've got the thing that I wanted. Now what do I want? Yeah. And again, because they haven't got this thing that they want, their motivation is high, massive action. Let's assume it's successful. Not always the case, of course. And so on and so on. So what happens, a pattern emerges here that we get this reevaluation, this recalibration, and we start to see this pattern. And this is what we call the towards pattern. Now, what's really interesting about this is if you think about it, the Metaprogramme is about mindset, and it's about a filter. So lots of people, for a variety of reasons, their mindset is, what is it that I must avoid at all costs? And therefore, they're getting this away from Metaprogramme. They're using this away from Metaprogramme. Whereas other people are thinking, okay, you know, I'm recognizing what I've got. What do I want next? Yeah, whatever that might be. Now, these are two very different patterns. And the other aspect of this, which I found scary, fascinating, it was one of those real penny dropping moments for me, was that the away from pattern, there is a paradox in the pattern, in that, okay, if we're very clear on what we don't want, first of all, the motivation to do something about it and avoid it comes very quickly. So the action that one takes when one is wanting to get away from something is often far more rapid than the towards one. Yeah, that's a characteristic of the pattern. But there is a paradox here, and it's to do with the way the mind works. Some of you will have heard me use this example before. I'm going to give you a very simple task here. And the simple task is, don't think of a pink elephant.
Doink.
That was a great noise. Exactly. So what happens is, because of the way the mind works, if I say to you, don't think of a pink elephant, your mind instantly thinks of a pink elephant. After that, you can, and it may be a split second after, you can then think of the fluffy white rabbit, and that takes you away from thinking of the pink elephant. However, it's too late. And that's because the way the brain operates is it cannot process a negative directly. So, you know, for example, I'll just stop sharing the screen for the moment. You know, if I said to you, you know, don't think about pens now, don't look at the screen and think about pens. Yeah, got it? See what happens. And if I say particularly, don't think about this blue pen. Now, we can comprehend that statement linguistically and follow those instructions if we choose to, but it's too late. So the paradox of the away from pattern is that the things we are concentrating on, it's like a mental rehearsal, that what we may be doing is that we may be making them more likely to happen. So there's a strong school of thought that says that if we are going through life reminding ourselves, telling ourselves of the things that we don't want, then paradoxically, we are being drawn towards them. So when you think about, for example, and I'm sure some of us will have done this, and you say to a child, don't fall down, the next thing that happens is that they'll take a tumble, because that's now in their frame of reference. So that's something to bear in mind about running and away from patterns. So we want you to be noticing, of course, your own patterns, whether you are more towards in your approach to life, or whether you are more away from. But when this was explained to me for the first time, that was a real kind of moment when I thought, gosh, I can really, see that if one was running that away from pattern, are we drawing ourselves towards it? It's a great question to reflect on.
And our experience, how it plays out in our coaching or therapy work, is people tend to come to you with an issue, a concern, a problem, something they often want to get away from. I don't want to be angry every time I speak to such and such a person. I don't want to feel this. I don't want to be all the sorts of things. I don't want to be unhealthy. Can you hear, any time I use any of those words after I don't want to be, anytime I use that word as word angry in a sentence, your minds go to angry. To make sense of the word, you in some way engage with what angry means, and your memories of angry moments and everything else will fill in then. And just to contrast that, when you're happy, when I say happy or delighted, just to leave you not in that place, but any word you use, because it is a metaphor for something and some experience, it will be drawn to mind. And that's when Kevin's saying we're rehearsing being in that state or doing that thing that we don't want every time we refer to it in that way. So one of the very key questions, Will, a very important, very useful thing when someone says, I've got this problem, whatever it is, to say, well, what do you want when that problem's not there? What do you want instead? What sort of reaction do you think you get from people? Very often you just get silence. People have never considered, they've spent so much time and energy playing with, and again, telling themselves stories and wondering about what they don't want. Angry, 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 as an example, or wait, 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 or eating food, whatever it is. They've spent so much time about it. They haven't thought of framing it in terms of what they want. They haven't got a model of what they want instead. They haven't got the model of having a calm conversation with my loved one or whatever that might be. Does that make sense to you? Can you see how people, it's such a different way of thinking about it. Often when we think about problems, issues, or anything else, and that solution-based problem solving, so you've still got the word problem in that one, but looking for solutions rather than investigating and over analyzing a problem is another sort of idea that relates to that. What do I want instead? You're setting yourself a goal, and every time you think about it in that positive languaging, or reframe it in that way, you're rehearsing what it's going to be like. Therefore your unconscious is attuned to looking out for that to happen. Therefore it's more likely to happen more easily. It's a fascinating one. Any comments? Because it's such a powerful one we spend a bit more time on. Oh, yes. Who was first? Shall I? John, you're already unmuted.
There, I think. Was off the mark.
On the money one, just a confession that I realised that I'm probably more towards and my wife's more away. But I control the bank accounts most of the time. So we have a joint account. So what I have to do is hide the income when it comes in a different account, so that she can see the balance going down to zero, so she spends less. That's just a confession. But it works. I've realised.
Just a useful form of manipulation.
Yeah. The other one, I have a speaker friend whose subject is helping people to, he used to drink too much and eat too much, and his thing now is called getting over indulgence and helping people to stop eating, food that's not going to do them good, and to give up drinking if they want to, or give up smoking. And he says it's very much like this. He says what you have to do is identify a question when you're about to eat another bit of cake or have a drink. How is that going to have me? You have to find the question for you, and it's a positive one. But how is that going to help me have more energy? And suddenly you don't want the cake.
Yeah.
It's that kind of that positive thing that means you're going towards that rather than something else.
And if in addition your friend reframed those things you said in the first place, don't want to overindulge, can you see every time he says overindulge, he's thinking about overindulging? The 3 things in a row in the statement you made to position that, before he got to the lovely ask yourself this question, that were reinforcing don'ts and it'd be better if I didn't, sort of things. So the whammy of having that magic question and also positioning things the other way might be really powerful. Thanks, John. Shell?
I think my question or thought was about complex goals, because that, what we saw was quite simple in terms of it was about money. And if that's your only goal and that's the level that you want to be at, then it's fairly straightforward, because you go all out to get that. But if it's more complicated and you want that amount of money, but also you're not prepared to give up all of your time in order to get that money, how do we do those? Is it best to have a kind of a goal for everything, or is it better to have one goal for money, one goal for time, one goal,
Well, maybe your goal could be your life purpose, whatever that happens to be.
I think the other thing in terms of goals is and this is generally good practice anyway, is if it is if it's a big picture goal, you've got to break it down anyway, and it's the breaking it down, those steps, that gives you the motivation or not. So I think that's a good way of approaching it, really.
And we have done the ultimate, not the well-formed outcome. The idea of positioning things as if you have it and it's a positive how you want it. In those conversations, that's where you get all the bits coming together. We are complex, human beings are complex, and all we can do in coaching, we can do a fantastic amount, but sometimes just doing a little bit here and a little bit there can make everything so much better. So even if the most complex, if you just chose one part of that most complex to concentrate on, because we work in systems and everything else, it's likely it's going to have a positive impact. I think once you've got it in your mindset, the potential of this, it's less daunting even when it's complex. Things are complex, but bite-sized chunks, breaking it down, which is the most important, which is the one I can tackle most easily now, which is the one I can make most progress of to motivate me more, and then choose the aspects that are really going to get the momentum going and help someone continue.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time on that first pattern. Hopefully that's kind of giving you a sense of what these patterns are like anyway. They quite often follow this idea of either one or the other. Some of the patterns are different. And the other thing about that, of course, is that when we talk about towards and away from as an example, it's unusual that anybody is wholly towards and wholly away from. You do find that occasionally, it appears. We might be somewhere in the middle, and we might be one or the other in a different context. However, I think there is an overall tendency, and remember, these are patterns, and we practice them, so we get good at them. So and they, we run them unconsciously. So if we're running a towards pattern or an away from, we get good at it and do more of it.
And as you'll see from the profile sheet you have, so the way we're presenting them is there's 2 ends of the scale, and you can be anywhere along it, like Kevin said. In general, neither's right nor wrong. not better or worse. They'll have contexts where they work and don't work. This is one where we do encourage people to think about the towards more so than some of the other ones, you know, to definitely be aware of it in business, in organizations, in setting your goals, in doing so much. So that's just one that we do want to encourage people. Having said that, there's enormous power in you appreciating someone. John, you volunteered that your wife may be away from in relation to that. It's a very useful thing. And John, you've worked out a brilliant strategy to utilize that as leverage. So when you know someone's away from, it can be a great speedy motivator. So you can utilize it. The person themselves, if you know in a certain context you're away from, you can utilize it to get kick yourself in the arse.
Quick motivation.
Quick motivation, is that a better phrase than kick you in the arse?
Yeah. No, that's both work very well. Both work very well.
So there's a level at which you can utilize wherever someone is on these things. In general, in a long-term situation, I'd put my hand up and say, I think it's more useful to be towards. So you can utilize it in the short time as a manager, as a friend, as a partner, or whatever. You can utilize.
And as a coach.
And as a coach. Oh, yeah, that.
Yeah. All right. So on the questionnaire, the questions, in terms of which questions relate to which meta program, I think they're pretty obvious. Obviously, the question on the questionnaire is, I think it's what makes you want to get on with your work, I think that's the question on there. And in terms of the way the lab profile does it, it's the way that we have shared with you the drilling down on one of the values. Now, we won't get you to regroup and do this, but what you will find is that when you get somebody to drill down 3 times on one of those statements, quite often the following statements will be either very towards or very away from. So if you can remember what your responses were when you were asked as client there, what's important to you about that, and what's important to you about that, you may notice a particular trend in terms of towards or away from. Yeah, and if you're looking at the responses of the person you were coaching, you may also notice a pattern, evidence of that pattern in their responses as well. It may be a mixture, but sometimes it's very clear when you do that activity. Yeah, so that's giving you a clue as to what your preferred pattern is, and if you're looking at your other responses, then it might give you a clue as to what the other person is running as a pattern as well. Okay, let's move on to look at our second pattern now, because time is another interesting pattern.
It is.
We're not going to look at that one today, but we'll come back on that one at some point in the future. We have different perceptions of the way in which we use time, which is a great pattern. But the one we're going to look at now, we'll just demonstrate this very quickly. So, Rita, tell me about your typical day.
Or someone else's typical day. Let me think.
Okay.
Someone I know who, do you know what, they wake up in the morning and it's just like they're just starting afresh with. They haven't necessarily planned overnight what they're going to do. They just get up, they've got a very vague idea of what they're going to do, and then they just take the day as it comes. Even in a working environment, they're always looking for something a little bit different. It's a bit hard to pin them down sometimes to what they're actually going to do. They just have lots of things going on, and sometimes making a commitment to a meeting, and even during a meeting that might have been about a topic, we can go offline a bit, take the opportunity to go somewhere else in the conversation, and not always achieve what maybe someone else might have planned to do. What about you, Kevin?
Okay, so somebody who I know is the complete opposite of that. They wake up in the morning at a prescribed time, which they've planned in the night before. They go down and they have a kind of a morning routine, which they go through very quickly. It's very clear in their mind exactly what they're going to be doing at all points during the day. So, you know, they get into that routine very quickly. They know that particular thing's going to finish by a certain time. They know what's coming next. They've done all of the planning, all of the preparation. And it's almost like, because they've mapped the day out, that, you know, it'll happen pretty much as they've planned out. And part of that day will be them planning the next day. So you know, they're following a particular linear path, probably, that they've mapped out for themselves.
So the difference we're describing there is really about someone liking procedures and someone who's running a pattern and enjoying options and possibilities. So
again, the question on the system, on the questionnaire is fairly straightforward one. In terms of the way the lab profile does it, and this is a question that you can ask in coaching. Just ask somebody to tell them, you know, how did you get into your current career, or, you know, how did you arrive at your sort of where you're living now? How did that happen? Just ask them some kind of question, and when you hear their answers, you will either hear them talk very much about, you know, this was pretty much a given, they were following their own rules maybe, or somebody else's rules. We'll come back to that later. But there was definitely a process, a procedure involved. It was very linear, very straightforward. With somebody else, it'll be about, you know, they obviously took an opportunity, something happened, and they took advantage of it, and they'll be stressing this idea of choice and options all the way along the line. So that's a very distinct pattern.
And remember why we're looking at the patterns is because these are motivational patterns. So if you know that you're at one end or other end of a scale, you know that you're stronger one or another, if you want to motivate yourself, you remind yourself, and you're an options person, you remind yourself that you've got choices. By making decisions, you're increasing your choices so that you're motivated. If I get on and do this, it will allow me to do all these other things. If your procedure, then you're wanting to set yourself procedures, have them lined out, and you probably will talk with your hands going up and down, and you'll be doing this and this and this, and it all falls into place nicely. And you'll want that to keep you motivated. When it becomes all choices and nothing's planned out, your motivation may decline. So you use it for yourself, and the same thing, it's leverage when you're working with coaches, colleagues, or anyone else. It's leverage to utilize it. When you know which one switches them on, you give them a choice when you're setting them a task. Don't tell someone whose options what to do. Don't say this is the right way of doing it, there's just one way. If they're an options person, say, don't mind how you do it, you could do it whichever way, or here's 3 different ways, which is your preferred way. And for the procedures person, ensure that it is tidy and not an open-ended brief, so that you're saying, I want to hear from you next week as to what you've done on Monday, Tuesday and Wednesday. I want a 10-minute essay, you know, whatever you want. Make it more procedural in the way you brief either a coach or a colleague. And
many years ago, when we first discovered this and we were trying to work out what our particular patterns were, this is one that we were slightly bemused by in relation to my pattern, because Rita was thinking I was very procedural, and I was thinking, no, I don't like the sound of that. I'm quite options. And Rita was coming up with all of these examples of all the procedures I like to follow. But what we then discovered was that somebody who is very options driven will come up with their own procedures and will frequently change them.
Yeah, they'll only come up with them and abide by them for a little while, because then they choose to do something different. That would be too much to stick to it, even if it works.
So sometimes people who are options, like a procedure, but they'll always be their own. Okay, so keep that one in mind.
Again, if you want to flick down to your bit of paper and put a little mark as to where you think you are on that scale, just for your own amusement. Jane's laughing. Which one would that be then, Jane? Which end?
I wonder.
And what's interesting, of course, when we're reviewing, when we're chatting to you, and also when we're reviewing your online, it becomes evident, and the questions people ask, many of these patterns, you can see how they come out in conversation and correspondence, etc.
And keep in mind this idea that these are filters, so whichever end you're operating from, they're a filter and you're missing information potentially that relates to the other side. Yeah. All right, let's move on and look at another one.
Something else to remember, and I've forgotten what it is. Anyway, carry on.
Okay.
Oh, the reason why, all right. So you may have, for most of your life, have been running and enjoying being a procedures person. It's never dawned on you that there's another way of doing it. That is part of this exercise as well. Even if it has been a preferred trait, first thing is awareness. There are other ways of doing it. And on occasions, other things will have advantage. There's huge advantages in either all of these meta programs, but there's contexts where the other side, on being further up the scale, works best. So now you're aware of it. Anyone who is strongly at one end of the scale, notice it and wonder what it'd be like if you did try the hat on of the other end of the scale, because that's the flexibility that will allow you to do more, influence more, achieve more. You knowing you can do that. But it may never have dawned on you that other people don't work the same way. You just got frustrated with them. But actually, they're not being awkward. They're just running a different pattern, and you could be talking chalk and cheese. And now you're starting to understand these patterns. Hopefully, the respect and value you give to other people's thought patterns increases too. Sorry, that was my important point.
No, that's all right. And it just reminded me, a great one for this pattern as well is holidays. I went on holiday with a pal of mine a few years ago, and he really wanted a procedural holiday. So I wanted every single day, every single second of every day mapped out. And that didn't quite sit with me, so we came to a compromise. That's an interesting one. How do you want a procedural holiday or do you want an options holiday? That's a good test.
Or a mix of both.
Okay, let's look at our next pattern. And what we want you to do now, we're going to put a little picture on the screen, and we just want you to make some observations about what you are seeing on the screen. So just write down 3 or 4 things about what you're seeing on the screen. Okay. Okie dokie. Fabulous. All right. So let's just have 1 or 2 of you just sharing some examples of what you've written down. Just open up your mic and share some examples. Sam.
Coins.
Coins, yeah. Was that it? Anything else you wrote?
Different sizes and colours and different values.
Okay, different sizes and colours, different values. Thank you. Yeah, somebody else?
5 British coins.
Okay, yeah.
5
Anything
British
else?
5 British coins on an orange background, ranging in value from right to left on 2 rows. Coppers segregated from silvers.
Ooh, wow.
Covered all of mine there.
Excellent.
But the orange background was kind of felty looking.
Could be. Oh, felty.
Felty, not filthy.
Good.
Both.
Chrissy.
Just that it's all money, coins, and it has a value,
Okay.
a collective value.
Yeah. Okay.
Spending
Clive,
power.
what have you got?
Not the same level of detail as Jane, because that's extraordinary. I wrote down 69p, 3/2, and silver/bronze in that ratio of 3:2, and then money at the end. So
Okay.
it kind of went from detail to bigger picture, I guess.
Okay.
Also all women, except for the harp on the penny. Go to see her, 3 queens and a harp. One end's just exit left.
You should be a magician. You're unbelievable.
He doesn't do
Okay, let's hear everybody. Anita?
What I said is what I wrote. So yeah. English sterling coins, heads up for the 50p and the 1p, heads down for all the others, copper and silver. And the pattern was quite pretty as it went from smaller to large, like pebbles on a beach.
Okay, great. Yeah. Lala?
First one was money, then silver and copper, and then shiny.
And shiny. Okay, great. And Shell, I think, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't write it down, but I can remember what I thought. 5 coins, orange background, 3 heads, 2 tails, and 3 silvers, 2 coppers, I think.
Yeah.
And one of the coins was 2006, which is my daughter's birth year.
Wow. Okay. I'll put it back up again. Now, first of all, I think that was everybody, wasn't it? Isn't it interesting that the wide variety of detail that people pick up there, what people notice in a very small sample of information? So that's interesting in itself. Now, what you may have noticed when we were hearing those examples there is some people were picking up patterns in what they were seeing. So they were noticing, they were using the filter, the metaprogram of, let me notice in what way are these items the same. So that's a particular filter again. In what way are these items the same? They were asking themselves unconsciously. And other people were asking the question unconsciously, in what way are these items different? What is it that's standing out? Yeah. And for some, it's a little bit of a mix of both, of course. But isn't that interesting? And this is such a great example of the way in which these things work as a filter, that we're picking up things from a totally different perspective at different ends of the scale. So this is a pattern that we call sameness and difference, not surprisingly.
And why it's interesting is people who sort by sameness will actually choose life choices that keep them in the same job for longer, perhaps don't decorate their house as frequently. They look out for patterns and maybe move from one thing that's similar to the next. Their style of clothing maybe look similar over time. Whereas someone who's sorting by difference, they looking perhaps maybe for more novelty sometimes. They may get bored in a job. They may stay in a job 18 months. The sameness sorter might be in a job for 8 years before they think of moving on. Obviously, there's all other things coming to bear on that as well. But someone who's sorting by difference may get bored more quickly. They want something different. And the same, again, just looking for yourselves, understanding these patterns, looking at your coachees, what are they looking for, helping them see what pattern they're running and what impact that might have on them. Kevin, did you want to mention about the difference, extreme difference sorter?
Yeah, it just also came to mind there that one guy who I was coaching some years ago, the first thing I noticed about him was he turned up in a car, and I'm not very good on cars, but it was one that I'd never seen before, and it was almost square. I don't know if anybody else can shed any light on what kind of car it might be, but it was really odd. It was kind of I'll have to find out what it was, but I thought, do you know what? I've never seen a car like this before. So I'm immediately thinking this is a guy who's running a difference pattern. So that's one of the things that you kind of, you test out your hypothesis with the person. Yeah, another way of thinking about this pattern is what we call match and mismatch. So the sameness person is a matcher. So somebody running a sameness pattern will by and large, if there is a group situation, they will tend to want to fit in and match with what's going on in the group situation. So if somebody in the group makes the suggestion and the group seem to be in agreement, the matcher will generally, the sameness person will generally go with the flow of what's being suggested. The opposite to that is what we call the mismatcher. The mismatcher is the one, and you know who they are, and if you don't know, it may be you. The mismatcher is the one who, whatever the group situation is, they will go against the grain. Yeah, just that's just the pattern that they're running, and it almost doesn't matter what's being suggested. If the group are going with it, they'll go against it. Yeah, because that's what they're looking for. This is again the way in which these act as filters. What they hear is a context or a particular suggestion being made, and immediately they're looking for how can I go against that. Yeah, and that's the unconscious pattern, the metaprogram that's running here. A very dear friend of ours who's no longer with us was always the person that Rita and I think about when we get to this point, because he was such an extreme mismatcher. And I used to find ways of dealing with him at times by, I went through a period of whatever I suggested, be it food, music, going out, beers or whatever, nothing was ever right. So I used to try out various techniques with him, and I used to say, well, I was thinking of recommending this to you, but it's probably something that you're not going to like. Yeah. So a bit of like reverse psychology. So he would sometimes mismatch that statement, and it was almost like, who are you to say that I'm not going to like something? Well, I think I might actually like this one. So the mismatcher pattern was very strong.
And language very helpful here. If you have a partner, a coachee, or anyone else you're wanting to influence, work with, build rapport with, and sameness, you don't talk about new exciting changes. You don't sell your ideas as big and exciting and so different. You say we're building on what we've already got. We're making adjustments. We're gentle steps for changes that you're bringing in, and in terms of difference, then you can go crazy with how big and exciting and how different it is. But particularly for the sameness, it can be very scary to be in situations where changes are happening. I mean, it's in terms of, I don't know, even what's happened with COVID and everything else, a generalization might be that people who are more sameness would have found it more distressing than people with a difference pattern. The speed of change, the necessity for change. There'll be lots of other factors as well, but people who like things to be stable, it can be quite scary when it's not like that, whereas a different sorter will be more comfortable with those changes coming along.
And this might be a little bit controversial, and so, you know, think about your own views and your own metaprogrammes in terms of this, but you know, there is a division in terms of those people who are going along with the rules, if you like, and mask wearing and vaccination and things, and those who are not. Obviously, people have their own reasons for following one course or the other. What we wonder is to what extent are metaprogrammes playing in people's decision making, and this is, you know, what we're talking about here. It's motivation, it's influencing our decision making unconsciously. So that, you know, that's always something to think about. Let's move into another pattern now. Should we take some examples of this next one, Rita? I think.
Is this frame of reference?
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one, an example. Okay, so we're talking here about people having different frames of references, either internal or external. And an example would be when Kevin and I worked as training managers or learning and development managers, and used to observe deliverers, facilitators of courses, and at the end of the session you'd be advising them, or, you know, talking to them about how the session went. You might invite one facilitator to tell you how it went, and they'd just say, I've really no idea, I haven't looked at the evaluation sheets yet. And they genuinely would be referring to that external verification for how well the program or session had gone. Whereas another person, you'd ask them how it went, and they'd say it was fab, this could have been better. They'd talk all the way through it, and then only at the end one might have to suggest to them, and let's see what the delegates or participants thought about it. So you've got people who are using their frame of reference, their judgment about whether they've done a good job or not, or whether other people have done a good job, either by external verification or they have an internal verification. So there's
let's just test that out with a couple of people. Chrissy, how do you know you've done a good job?
I get a feel-good factor in myself, and once I've got that, sometimes I get verification from the outside.
Okay. And Chrissy, what happens? I'm really curious now, because that's a great example of a pattern, I think. What happens if you get that good feeling that whatever it is you've done has been really good, it's gone well, and then some of the feedback that you get is the complete opposite? What happens then?
I go back and review maybe some of the steps that I took that I can verify and say, yeah, this part is okay, and take on board feedback that I've got to see if it matches my criteria. If not, what do I need to learn more of? Okay.
And what's your kind of first response when you hear that feedback that's perhaps contradicting your initial view? What's your first response?
Reactionary, sick at heart initially.
Okay.
And then once that's settled, I can address it.
Okay. And do you tend to accept people's feedback if it contradicts you in that initial moment?
Not anymore.
Okay.
I think I did when I was younger.
Yeah.
But now I'll stop and stand back and reflect a little bit more. Yeah. I'll let things sink in for a while.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, that sounds like a very appropriate and useful approach that you're adopting there. So, you know, it's really interesting hearing Chris's pattern there, that that seemed to be very, very internal, didn't it? Because, you know, she said she gets that feeling, and I think there were some sort of gestures there which were, you know, referring to the evaluation, if you like, was coming from within. But does that seem to fit, Chrissy?
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
Now, obviously, it makes sense to take account of what other people are saying as well. You know, we'd be fools if we didn't do that. But it's, where is that initial evaluation coming from? For some people, they're not very good or very adept, or they're not running that pattern that is enabling them to know whether the quality of what they've done is good or not. They need to get that external viewpoint. Yeah, so it's a very different approach. And in fact, what's also interesting is that sometimes if we are an internal referencer, and let's say we get a view that actually what we did was rubbish, yeah, if the feedback is coming in afterwards that says that was absolutely great, sometimes we go, really? I don't think you know what you're talking about. Yeah. So our initial response can often be, if the external feedback is not agreeing with our internal evaluation, is we can start to critique the people who are giving the feedback. Yeah.
Or ignore them. And maybe in the coaching environment, you might get this a lot. Someone who has got a limiting belief about themselves or their capabilities, however much evidence, you know, we use the meta program and we help to build the evidence, etc. But it almost seems if they're very, very internally referenced, it's not, you know, sometimes it can be an arrogance because they think they're fantastic and what any feedback comes in, they don't listen to. But equally, it can be someone who's got low morale, self-esteem or whatever, and they can't hear. You know, they're not, so we have to help them open up to be able to hear. So the first thing is to notice that that's what's going on for the person and there is this pattern, and then use many tools to help them overcome that. But it's a very interesting one, and any extremes will have positives and less useful aspects to them.
And in terms of coaching, this is quite significant in that if somebody is an external referencer, they will take on board perhaps more readily some of the suggestions, some of the ideas that you're sharing with them. If somebody is a more internal referencer, you might need to position things as if the advice is coming from them. For example, you might say something like, you know, I know that you know what's best for you in this situation. Yeah. So the words are actually coming from you, but you're positioning it as if it's coming from them. That will be more readily received by them. Okay. Wow, look at the time. We've got time for one more pattern today. We'll be sharing more online, and some of the ones we'll be sharing online are very easy to understand because you'll be familiar with them already. For example, there is a pattern about proactive and reactive. You know, you probably have a good understanding of what that is already. So we'll be sharing some of these patterns. The other thing to say, incidentally, is we're going to be focusing on, I don't know how many there is, Rita, maybe there's about a dozen, maybe, yeah, somewhere around there. Depending on which book you pick up, there are sort of 40 or 50. We think that's stretching it a little bit personally. But there are other patterns, so we would encourage you to, you know, have a look into this a little bit more. We were looking at something the other day which was sharing some patterns about the way in which people listen and the way in which people communicate, for example, which seems to be really interesting. So we'll be sharing those at some later point, no doubt. But the one we want to finish on today is what we call the convincer patterns. And whereas the ones that we've looked at so far today are about motivation, this comes under the category of more of a working style one. And so we're going to share. Shall I share screen and you talk this one through, Ray?
Okay, so this is about how you convinced you've learned something or know something. And there's two aspects to the convincer pattern. The first is the channel. So we ask you, we'll ask the question, we won't have time to go around, but how would you know that someone else is good at something? How would you know that someone was a good presenter? How would you know that someone else has learned something you've helped them through in coaching? What would you need to see, hear, or do, or read about that would let you know that they've got it? So hopefully you're coming up with an example for yourself. So this is the mode that to be convinced, we humans have preferences for seeing something. You might see someone presenting and think that was great. You might hear them or hear the feedback about it and it was all great. You might read a review of what was done, or you might actually have been involved in it with them and could experience how you felt when they were doing the presentation. So there'd be a different mode for you. So that's in terms of, and it's interesting that even if we've done representational systems, let's say as you had a preference for visual, it may or may not be the same mode for your convincer strategy or working trait. And then there's a second aspect to it.
Yep.
Is here, and this is the mode of it. The channel was the first one, sorry, and the mode of it now there's 4 different modes. So you sort of take that first being, I need to see it, and then you're asking how many times would you have to see this to be convinced. Okay, so there's the 4 different modes though are automatic. You're convinced immediately from review of the evidence. See,
that's what we call a one-time convincer.
See it once, you're convinced. Hey, you might think that's great, okay? But then they see something else and they're convinced of that. They hear your coaching wisdom and are convinced it's going to work. They leave the room, see something on telly, hear something else, they're convinced of that. So you can see how, it's a little bit, it sounds great, they're convinced immediately and you'll get a nice good feeling. However, it may not have registered deep because it may change quickly. The number of times you need to see it, hear it, or been involved with it to appraise it and be convinced by it. The number of times, the most frequent number of times for people seems to be 3. So that's why if you're doing or testing something, you may choose to test it 3 times. If you're doing a future pacing in your coaching, you may ask people, your client, to have a go with it 3 times as their future pacing. What difference does this new way of working made for them? 3, the rule of 3 is very powerful. If you're lost and you don't know, and if you haven't noticed it, notice for yourself, how many times do you need to do, see, hear, or feel something to be convinced? Period of time. For some people, it's I have to do it for 2 months. I have to done it for days. I have to sleep overnight on it before I'm convinced. If I still feel the same in the morning, I'm convinced. So that's a very interesting one, which I think you'll hear. And of course, there's loads of clues to this in people's conversations, but you can ask them directly, how many times do you need to? Consistent is another interesting one that's quite challenging. Never completely convinced. So you've built up a relationship with a client and you've done great things with them and they leave happy one day, and the next session and the next session. The next session, they still need to be convinced. You're almost starting from scratch on in your convincing stakes with the person. So it's called consistent, which is a bit weird because basically they're sort of never convinced. They take everything at face value from
consistently never convinced.
Consistently never convinced. Because they start from scratch each time. It's like you haven't got the investment, you know, for someone else it's time or number. They'll also have this history to build on and come in at a different level. But you do have some individuals, you know, just convince me, you know, tell me again, you know, show me. So if you were going for a pitch, you know, you might have someone you've worked with or someone who's buying some of your services, and you convinced them last year to sign up for a year, and you think, well, and I've done a great job and everything, and you think, oh, I don't need to bother putting the full pitch together again, but you may have to. So those two are the most I'm wanting to say awkward, there's probably a better word, challenging to work with, the automatic and the consistent. The other ones, you can actually do things in the time very often, or at least conversationally, you can speak to someone, and if they generally need 2 weeks to make up their mind about something and you're pushing for it, ring them in 1 week and say, oh, I've been so busy, it feels like it's been at least a fortnight since I spoke to you. And you cleverly play that trick in the mind that if you've paced with them and you've got good rapport, they may go along and be ready to be convinced at that stage. That was a quick run through. Does it make sense, people?
The automatic and the unconvinced one, they could almost, you could mistake them for each other, couldn't you? Sorry, my cat's choosing now to sit on the screen. You could mistake them for each other, because you might think they're convinced as an automatic convincer, and actually they're never convinced of anything. I worked with someone who was both, I think, in that they made their mind up like that, and then you could never change their mind. It was to do with a learning difficulty, but they were a nightmare to work with.
Yeah.
Once they took against someone, they were convinced immediately that they'd done them a wrong, and then you'd never be able to convince them otherwise unless you had every bit of evidence and truth, and that was really tough.
It's interesting, and I think on what Jane said, I think the automatic, you might think you've convinced someone and then be surprised that you haven't. With the consistent, I'm not sure if you'd still have an expression of skepticism. You might not, but there's a subtle difference, but they're both awkward in a similar way, because you're never sure that it's going to have the longevity you'd want the
But I suppose the other side of it is that with the automatic, they may be convinced and that's it.
Yeah.
You know, then they don't change. That's it. You know, I'm as John's saying there, but they may be convinced of something that is actually useful to them.
Yeah.
And with the consistent, you may get a sense that they're never really taking it on board, or they're never really changing a belief or whatever. Okay, so that's a great pattern. Now, some of the other patterns here, again, we'll share these online, and they're pretty obvious. Do people tend to focus more on people or on things, for example? And again, I'm sure you can think of people who you know. Some people are thinking about people aspects of things, maybe people who you work with, and other people who you work with or who you know are more interested in stuff, things. Similarly, where are people's attention? Is it on themselves or is it on other people? So in a group situation, where is their focus?
And then the simple ones, perhaps the big picture or detail that we know, if you want to build rapport, it's good to be on the same page on that one. And then self and others, which is a very interesting one in terms of people being more internal, just aware of what's going on for them and oblivious to what's happening for others, or really out there concerned all the time about others, and at the extreme forget about themselves and perhaps potentially become a victim to all sorts of things. So it's now past. I'm going to invite you, because I think this is an interesting one. just to write something. What is there one pattern already that you've learned about, that you've noticed something about yourself that you want to look at further? Is there a pattern? What's been interesting today, as we start talking about patterns, and every other time we talk together, we see patterns come out, don't we, in our virtual group here. We hear the way people approach things, and there's so many tells. And that's part of just raising awareness. So just something that sparked your attention, your interest, your curiosity more today about patterns, either for yourself or something you definitely want to find out more about. Just mark that one down, because we'll make sure we've covered it well in what we do online.
I thought Anita was demonstrating being a different sort of there by getting up and leaving, but
Sorry, I just like
Thanks, Jane. Now that could be Jane being a different person. Difference. Has anyone written anything? Not yet. Oh, good, you're thinking. Excellent. It's not like WhatsApp. You can't see if people are typing or not, except on the video. Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Procedure and options, very good.
It is so interesting, as you are aware, Kevin and I have worked together now, I don't know for how many years, many years, and it's still interesting to notice things as we review these patterns. We say, oh yeah, I forgot about that one. You definitely do that. You know, we do it all lightheartedly, and we always have perfect rapport, don't we, Kevin?
Absolutely.
Because if you're at one end of the scale or the other on any occasion or in any context, the feeling can be a frustration, because it is like you're talking a different language, or planning in a different way, or doing all sorts of things differently. And so it's so useful to have this awareness in terms of our tolerance and collaboration and respect for each other. And that's really, really powerful, just noticing, and what I'm doing isn't right, letting go of the fact that because I do it this way, it's right, although that's a pattern as well, where some people think they're right, and therefore that's a filter on how they live in the world. But if we are able to let go of that and just be curious, which is our message. Lots of changes to consider, options and procedures. Ooh.
So there's no coaching session on this. In fact, I think all of the coaching sessions we've assigned to you now, and most of you have done them. We've had a slight backlog in terms of getting round to looking at them and giving you feedback, but we're on top of that now, I think, pretty much, or getting that way. The sessions have been fabulous. Yeah, it's been great. It's really encouraging for us to see how you're putting these into practice in the coaching sessions. So that's great.
A quick smile at the camera, save me doing too much thingy. Smile and wave, please. Excellent, thank you. Lovely. And wish you well. And if anyone, we're here for another few moments. If anyone has got a question they want to ask, do ask it, because it's such a fun sort of stuff. And oh no, I'll be saying goodbye. Bye.
Okay, we'll see you next time for our final session.
Is it?